The punch connected with surgical precision. Vincent Rothschild, untouchable king of Westbrook Elite Academy for 4 insufferable years, sat perched on the cafeteria table like he owned the world. Then Lauren Sinclair's fist changed everything. The impact sent shock waves through the entire table, launching plates skyward in a spectacular display of chaos. Spaghetti painted red arcs through the air while drinks exploded in fountains of sticky sweetness. Vincent's body flew backward, his designer blazer flapping like broken wings before his spine met the floor with a sound that made 400 students gasp in unison. Lauren stood perfectly still, her platinum blonde hair catching the fluorescent lights, breathing as calmly as if she'd merely brushed dust from her shoulder. Lauren Sinclair had arrived at Westbrook Elite Academy exactly 72 hours earlier on a Monday morning that seemed deliberately designed to showcase her ethereal beauty. Her porcelain skin seemed to glow under the harsh school lighting, and her platinum waves moved like liquid silk with each step. She wore designer clothes with understated elegance that whispered old money. Every head turned as she passed, drawn to her like moths to a particularly elegant flame. Nobody noticed the carefully concealed calluses on her knuckles, hidden beneath expensive concealer. They missed how her eyes swept each room with the calculated assessment of someone cataloging exits, blind spots, and potential threats. When she chose her seats in each classroom, always with her back to a wall and clear sight lines to every door, teachers assumed she was simply particular about her environment. The social hierarchy at Westbrook operated with brutal efficiency. Vincent Rothschild ruled from its apex with casual cruelty. Standing at 6 feet 2 inches with classical features that belonged on museum statues, he commanded the lacrosse team with the same iron fist his father used to manage a $3 billion hedge fund. Vincent collected beautiful girls the way other people collected vintage wines, carefully selected, possessed, and eventually discarded when they no longer amused him. His inner circle consisted of Sterling Brennan, a hockey player whose diplomat father provided him with technical immunity, and Dimitri Cross, whose mother's position as a federal judge meant even teachers thought twice before challenging him. Together, they had perfected the welcome ritual for attractive new female students, a systematic campaign of pursuit, possession, and psychological destruction that had driven at least 5 girls from Westbrook in the past 2 years alone. Isabella Carmichael had lasted exactly 2 weeks before her parents quietly withdrew her and relocated to Spain. Anastasia Volkov managed 3 weeks before switching to homeschooling. The pattern was consistent and cruel. Vincent would approach, charm would fail. Then came ultimatums, social isolation, whispered threats. Most girls either submitted to dating him for protection or fled the school entirely. Vincent had approached Lauren's table on her first day with the swagger of someone who'd never heard the word no spoken with genuine conviction. He'd leaned over her table, his cologne aggressive and expensive, and delivered his standard opening line about how she was sitting in his section of the cafeteria. Lauren hadn't even looked up from her yogurt, simply responding that she didn't see his name on anything. The slight had been public enough that Vincent's crew had noticed. Vincent had leaned closer, his voice dropping to what he considered his intimidating register, informing her that everything beautiful in this school bore his name eventually. That's when Lauren had finally raised her eyes to meet his. Something in those ice-blue depths made Vincent take an involuntary step backward. She'd scanned him with clinical detachment, then told him she'd met 100 guys exactly like him. Same lines, same games, same fundamental weakness disguised as strength. The cafeteria had gone silent. Everyone waited to see how Vincent would respond to this unprecedented challenge to his authority. He'd recovered quickly, laughing it off as new girl confusion, promising her she'd understand the rules soon enough. But Lauren had already dismissed him, returning to her lunch as if he'd ceased to exist entirely. By Tuesday morning, Vincent had already begun spreading rumors about Lauren, painting her as an ice queen. He'd instructed his crew to make her life subtly difficult. Books knocked from her hands, her name mysteriously removed from sign-up sheets, teachers suddenly forgetting to call on her. But Lauren navigated these petty obstacles with serene indifference. That Wednesday's lunch period arrived with the kind of tension usually reserved for championship games. The entire student body sensed that something momentous was about to occur. Vincent entered the cafeteria flanked by Sterling and Dimitri, wearing his most expensive outfit. Lauren sat at her usual table, methodically eating a salad, seemingly oblivious to the approaching storm. Vincent didn't walk to her table so much as perform a victory parade. When he reached Lauren's table, he didn't sit in a chair, but instead planted himself directly on the table itself, his designer boot positioned inches from her food in a display of dominance. Lauren continued eating, her movements unhurried and precise, as if Vincent were nothing more than an oddly shaped piece of furniture. Vincent reached for Lauren's water bottle with deliberate slowness, making sure everyone could see what was about to happen. He unscrewed the cap and began pouring the contents over her carefully prepared salad. The cafeteria fell silent except for the splash of water. This was Vincent's signature move, the public humiliation that preceded total social destruction. But Lauren simply set down her fork with a soft click that somehow carried across the entire room. She looked up at Vincent with those Arctic eyes, and something in her expression made Dmitri take an unconscious step backward. Vincent launched into his prepared speech about how things worked at Westbrook. She could be his girl with all the protection and privilege that entailed, or she could be nobody, a ghost drifting through Westbrook's halls. He pulled out his phone with theatrical flourish, showing her his contacts list filled with the names of every person who mattered. One text, he promised, and every door would close to her. Sterling and Dmitri moved into position, flanking Lauren's chair to physically emphasize how trapped she was. Vincent reached down and touched Lauren's hair, letting the platinum strands run through his fingers with possessive familiarity. Lauren's voice, when she finally spoke, was low enough that people in the back of the cafeteria had to lean forward to hear her. She told Vincent to remove his hand from her hair immediately. Vincent laughed, his fingers tightening their grip on her hair as he asked what she thought she could do about it. Lauren began counting in a voice devoid of emotion, starting with 1. Sterling actually laughed at this. When Lauren reached 2, Vincent pulled her hair harder, forcing her head back at an uncomfortable angle while informing her that he owned this school. Lauren said 3 with the finality of a judge delivering a death sentence. She stood slowly, Vincent still maintaining his grip on her hair, apparently amused by what he assumed would be a futile attempt at resistance. Her next words would haunt Vincent's dreams for months afterward. She told him he should have listened, and something in the way she said it made the smartphones come out all across the cafeteria. Vincent opened his mouth to deliver another threat, but Lauren was already moving with purposeful efficiency that separated trained fighters from angry amateurs. The punch was a thing of brutal beauty, a perfect right cross that would have made professional boxers nod approval. Lauren's entire body moved as one unit, power flowing from her planted back foot through her rotating hips, up her core, and down her arm in a kinetic chain that multiplied force at every link. Her fist connected with Vincent's jaw while he was still sitting on the table, the angle perfect for maximum impact. The sound was wet and meaty, nothing like the comic book pow that movies had taught students to expect. Vincent's head snapped back so violently that for a moment it seemed physically disconnected from his body. The momentum carried through his entire frame, lifting him off the table and sending him airborne in a backward arc. The table responded by launching its contents skyward. Plates became frisbees, spinning through the air, trailing spaghetti like red ribbons. Cups exploded their contents in fountain-like arcs. Vincent's body completed its journey by crashing into the floor with an impact that rattled windows. He landed flat on his back, arms spread wide, his eyes rolling back to show only whites. The silence that followed was so complete that everyone could hear the drip of spilled drinks hitting the floor. Sterling Brennan recovered from his shock first, his hockey player instincts overriding his common sense as he lunged at Lauren from her left side. Lauren pivoted with the grace of a dancer and the precision of a surgeon. Her hands found his reaching wrist with practiced ease, and suddenly Sterling discovered he was no longer in control of his own momentum. Lauren executed a hip throw that judo practitioners would have recognized as a perfect owogashi. Sterling crashed into a neighboring table with enough force to collapse its legs. Dmitri Cross possessed slightly better survival instincts, immediately raising his hands in surrender and backing away from Lauren. He tried to explain that he didn't want any trouble, but his backward momentum was interrupted by Vincent's unconscious form. Dimitri's foot caught on Vincent's outstretched arm, sending him tumbling backward. He scrambled across the floor on all fours, trying to put as much distance as possible between himself and the blonde girl who'd just demolished his entire social circle in less than 10 seconds. In the center of this chaos, Lauren calmly returned to her seat, picked up her apple from where it had rolled to safety, and took a deliberate bite. The crunch echoed through the silent cafeteria like punctuation at the end of a particularly emphatic sentence. She chewed thoughtfully, swallowed, and then asked the room at large if anyone else wanted to discuss ownership. The spell broke when someone finally managed to scream for the nurse. The school nurse arrived with the speed of someone who'd been expecting this call for years. She took one look at Vincent's condition and immediately called for backup. Principal Morrison appeared moments later, his face cycling through expressions of disbelief, horror, and calculation. The ambulance arrived with its sirens muted but lights flashing. The EMTs stabilized Vincent's neck and carefully loaded him onto a gurney. He was beginning to stir, his eyes unfocused and confused. Sterling had been extracted from the table wreckage and was insisting he was fine while obviously being anything but. Dmitri hadn't moved from his position against the wall. The EMTs decided to transport all 3 boys for evaluation. Lauren found herself in Principal Morrison's office 20 minutes later. The principal paced behind his desk like a caged animal, unable to find words adequate to address what had just occurred. When Morrison finally found his voice, his first question was about where she'd learned to fight like that. Lauren's response was characteristically understated, mentioning that her mother had insisted on self-defense classes. The conversation was interrupted by Morrison's phone ringing with the call he'd been dreading. Vincent's father's voice could be heard even though the phone wasn't on speaker, demanding answers, threatening lawsuits, promising to destroy anyone involved in his son's injury. The door to Morrison's office opened without a knock, and in walked Ms. Adelaide Chun, the AP biology teacher. She held her phone in one hand and a folder thick with papers in the other. She announced that she'd witnessed the entire incident and had been documenting Vincent Rothschild's behavior for the past 2 years. The folder she placed on Morrison's desk landed with a thud that seemed to echo with the weight of evidence it contained. Adelaide began pulling out printed screenshots, photographs, and transcript after transcript of complaints that had been filed and mysteriously disappeared from official records. She had emails from Isabella Carmichael's parents begging for help before they'd fled to Spain. She had medical records from Anastasia Fokov's therapy sessions. There were witness statements from students too frightened to come forward officially, security footage from incidents that had supposedly been erased, and a detailed timeline of how each girl Vincent had targeted had been systematically isolated and broken. The security officer was reviewing his tablet when he made a discovery that changed everything. He'd found a small mention in a Detroit newspaper from 2 years ago. Lauren had been the junior Golden Gloves champion in the female welterweight division at age 15. But then something had happened, an incident that resulted in sealed juvenile records and a sudden end to what should have been a promising boxing career. There were hints about 3 men who'd attempted to assault Lauren's training partner after a match, and how Lauren had intervened with results that required multiple ambulances. Adelaide turned to Morrison and informed him that if the school tried to punish Lauren for defending herself, every piece of evidence in that folder would be sent to the State Education Board, the media, and the FBI's white-collar crime division. The phone rang again, and this time Morrison put it on speaker. Vincent's father's voice filled the room like poison gas, demanding that Lauren be expelled immediately. But before Morrison could respond, Adelaide grabbed the phone and introduced herself. She informed Mr. Rothschild that his son had sexually assaulted a student by grabbing her hair and refusing to release her despite clear verbal warnings. She had witnesses, video evidence, and a pattern of similar behavior stretching back years. The silence on the other end stretched for so long that Morrison checked to make sure the call hadn't disconnected. When Rothschild spoke again, his voice had lost its bluster. He asked what it would take to make this situation disappear. Adelaide's response was swift and merciless. Vincent would withdraw from Westbrook immediately, citing medical reasons. He would undergo intensive therapy. The family would establish a fund for the girls Vincent had hurt, and they would never contact or come near Lauren Sinclair again. The terms were non-negotiable, and Rothschild had exactly 1 hour to decide. The call ended with Rothschild's grudging agreement. Adelaide turned to Lauren and told her she was free to return to class. Lauren stood gracefully, thanked Adelaide for her intervention, and walked out of the office as calmly as she'd entered it. Word of what had happened spread through Westbrook like wildfire. Videos of the confrontation were already circulating on social media. Lauren walked through the hallways to a symphony of whispers and stares. Girls who'd suffered under Vincent's attention looked at her with something approaching worship. Lauren found an unexpected ally in Scarlett Washington, the captain of the debate team. Scarlett approached Lauren in the library, thanking her for what she'd done. She explained that her younger sister had been one of Vincent's targets the previous year and had only escaped serious trauma because their parents hired security to escort her to and from school. The conversation was interrupted by Lauren's phone buzzing with a message from an unknown number. Lauren excused herself and walked to the parking lot where a black sedan with tinted windows sat idling. The woman who stepped out wore an expensive suit. She introduced herself as Patricia Hartwell and explained that she'd been sent by the Carmichael family. The truth was more calculated than anyone could have imagined. Isabella Carmichael's attempted suicide after Vincent's assault had nearly succeeded, leaving her in a coma for 3 weeks. When she'd finally recovered, her family had wanted justice, but knew the Rothschilds' influence made legal remedies impossible. Instead, they'd reached out through back channels to find someone who could deliver a different kind of justice. They'd found Lauren through her mother, who ran a self-defense program for assault survivors. The Carmichaels had offered to pay for Lauren's education at any school she chose if she would transfer to Westbrook and wait for Vincent to inevitably target her. Lauren had volunteered without hesitation, having her own reasons for wanting to confront predators who thought their privilege protected them from consequences. Patricia handed Lauren an envelope containing a bank card and documents confirming that her tuition at any university she chose would be fully covered. The Carmichaels wanted Lauren to know that Isabella was recovering, that watching the video of Vincent's defeat had given her a sense of closure. There was also a request. Other families had reached out, families with daughters at different schools facing similar situations. Would Lauren consider continuing what she'd started at Westbrook? Lauren's smile when she accepted was sharp enough to cut glass. Back at school, Sterling Brennan approached Lauren during lunch the next day. He didn't try to sit at her table, maintaining a respectful distance as he apologized not just for his actions, but for years of enabling Vincent's behavior. The apology seemed genuine, though Lauren's expression suggested she'd reserve judgment until she saw actual change. Dimitri cross-transferred schools within a week, his departure so sudden that he left half his belongings in his locker. Other members of Vincent's extended circle began reassessing their behavior, most out of simple self-preservation. The message had been received loud and clear that the old rules no longer applied. Adelaide Chun became Lauren's unofficial mentor at Westbrook. Together, they established new protocols for reporting harassment, with Adelaide ensuring that no complaint would ever again disappear into administrative convenience. The changes weren't just procedural but cultural, with assemblies addressing consent and respect in ways that previous administrations would have considered too controversial. That a month after the cafeteria incident, Lauren received another message from a girl named Olivia at a private school in Boston. The message included photos of bruises carefully hidden beneath expensive clothing and a question that echoed Isabella Carmichael's desperation. Could Lauren help? The network Patricia had mentioned was taking shape, an underground railroad of girls trained to fight back against predators who thought their money made them untouchable. Lauren's mother had expanded her self-defense program with the Carmichael funding, specifically recruiting girls who'd been victims and training them not just in physical combat, but in the legal and psychological aspects of confronting systematic abuse. Principal Morrison announced his early retirement at the end of the semester. His replacement was Dr. Janet Thornton, who'd made her reputation cleaning up corrupt athletic programs. Her first action was to invite Adelaide Chun to become assistant principal for student affairs. That Lauren's true identity as a trained fighter became an open secret at Westbrook, though the full extent of her mission remained known only to a select few. She continued attending classes, maintaining excellent grades. But now when she walked through the halls, there was space around her, not from fear, but from respect. Girls who'd never had the courage to report harassment found themselves approaching her, sharing their stories, asking for advice. The semester was drawing to a close when Lauren noticed something unusual during lunch. A new student had appeared without the usual fanfare, strikingly beautiful, with raven black hair and emerald eyes. She sat alone at a corner table eating with the same mechanical precision Lauren recognized from her own movements. The girl's positioning was perfect. Back to wall. Exits cataloged. Point three boys from the lacrosse team began approaching the new girl. One of them reached for her hair in a move so similar to Vincent's that it might have been deliberate homage. The new girl's hand moved faster than most people could track, intercepting the boy's wrist and applying just enough pressure to make him yelp. She looked directly at Lauren across the cafeteria and nodded slightly. A greeting between professionals. Lauren smiled and returned to her apple. The new girl released the boy's wrist and suggested quite pleasantly that he and his friends find somewhere else to be. As the boys retreated, the new girl pulled out her phone and sent a message. Lauren's phone buzzed a moment later with two words that confirmed what she'd suspected. Phase 2, the network Patricia had described, wasn't just about responding to individual predators anymore. It was about systematically dismantling the culture that created and protected them, one school at a time. The cafeteria returned to its normal buzz, but underneath the familiar rhythms, something fundamental had shifted. The hunters were becoming the hunted. Lauren finished her lunch and prepared for her next class, but her mind was already on what came next. The new girl across the cafeteria was just the beginning. There were others being trained, others being placed, others ready to ensure that what happened to Isabella Carmichael would never happen again. As the bell rang, Lauren caught one last glimpse of the new girl's bag shifting as she stood. The outline of what looked like boxing wraps was briefly visible through the fabric before being hidden again. The message was clear without words being spoken. Westbrook Elite Academy was no longer a hunting ground for predators. It was now a training ground for those who hunted them. Somewhere in Boston, another girl was reading Olivia's message that help was coming, that she wouldn't have to face her tormentors alone, that the network created by one perfect punch in a Connecticut cafeteria was spreading like wildfire through the carefully manicured lawns of privilege and power. Lauren Sinclair had thrown the first punch, but she wouldn't throw the last. As she walked to her next class, Lauren's phone buzzed again.